Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of VC TV. I'm your host, Kyle Ellicott, and we are back today to speak about healthcare. What is happening throughout the healthcare industry from an innovation and a technology standpoint? But more importantly, the healthcare sector as a whole, where is technology playing a role? Well, a lot happened in 2020, as we know, but even more so the decade before, we saw a lot of innovations really pushing the bounds as to where the healthcare industry would go. Well, 2021 is here. We're now looking at this decade in front of us, and advancements seem to be happening on a more aggressive scale than the previous 10 years. Well, we're going to find out today as we've brought in some experts from around the world to share their insights into this particular area and all of that may be happening around the world. But first, if this is your first time tuning in, make sure you click subscribe, share the episode, and also check out the archive on LATOKEN.com to hear from today's speakers and all speakers on today's subject from the VCTV family. And if you'd like to be on a show like today, either as an investor or as an entrepreneur, do reach out to the team and or myself, and we'll find that right spot for you. Speaking of the team, a big thank you to the LATOKEN team and to Maria for making VCTV possible every single day. With that, I'm your host, Kyle Ellicott. Let's go ahead and introduce today's guest. Harsh, welcome back to the show. A little intro, a little background.
Sure, glad to be back, Kyle, and glad to have you again on the show. Just a brief bio about myself. I'm Harsh Shettiya. I'm an MBA graduate, worked with several companies, Fortune 50 companies, unicorns in the health tech, fintech space. Currently, I'm working as a venture partner with our ventures, where we basically help startups grow and help them raise funds all the way up to $10 million and trying to help them go global as well. So that's a brief about me. I'm looking forward for a great panel discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sarah, welcome to the show as well. Pleasure to have you. A little intro and a little background. Sarah, there's a little delay, and it sounds like you might be on mute there as well.
Right, okay.
There you go.
Right. Okay, you can hear me now, I think. So sorry, there is a bit of choppiness on the tech at the moment. But hello, everybody. My name's Sarah Rickwood. I run thought leadership in IQVIA, which is a very large services provider to the global pharmaceutical and healthcare industries. I've worked with them for about 20 years. So I've been in healthcare for almost 3 decades now. And never has it changed, I think, quite so rapidly as it did in 2020.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to the show. And let's just go right on to that. I mean, what have you seen happen in 2020 that led us to where we are and where we're going in 2021 around the industry of healthcare? And Sarah, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, I think that it's rather like I think it was Lenin who said there are decades when nothing happens and then weeks when decades happen. The industry was progressing towards becoming more digital, both in terms of how healthcare systems operated, but also in terms of how therapies were delivered, or even how pharmaceutical companies engaged with the doctors that they needed to talk to. But progress was slow, and it was also running at different speeds in different countries. What the pandemic did by requiring social distancing, by making much of healthcare remote, by making the communications that pharma had with its healthcare professional customers remote, was move things very, very fast. It was a catalyst in that respect. Now, in terms of the ways that healthcare professionals engage with patients and also with pharma, there's going to be some rebound because people do value face-to-face engagements, and for patients, face-to-face is often necessary. But we're not going back to 2019. We are going to be in a new place where the role of digital in terms of how patients and healthcare professionals interact and pharma interacts with them is more substantial. We will also probably see new innovations much more valued, which can make patients able to take their treatments at home, diagnose themselves perhaps remotely, and so on and so forth.
And what do you think will be some of those examples? So being able to take those medicines at home, to be able to diagnose themselves at homes. Do you see this as telehealth? Do you see particular devices that may be rising in the ranks to do any of that, or things that might be opportunistic?
Okay, well, it will be opportunistic in the sense that it has to be tailored to the need of a patient with a particular condition. And the need of a patient, for example, who is suffering from dementia are going to be very different to the needs of a patient who has, for example, rheumatoid arthritis. For the rheumatoid arthritis patient, the ability to self-administer their medication subcutaneously may be the key advantage. In other words, the innovation is about delivery device. For the patient with dementia, it may well be about digital biomarkers that help to monitor and understand condition, and also support them in terms of everyday living, so that they can be independent for longer. So the common thread is about digital innovation, but what life sciences companies need to think about is the way that they apply technology to the needs of particular patients with particular conditions.
Which we've started to see, to your point earlier, we've seen a big transition to that, and even more personalized medicine to come as well. And Harsh, I want to come to you next on this. Furthering Sarah's point, what have you seen as the transition from last year into this year, whether that be in India or that be on a global scale as well?
So the biggest change that has happened in India is the huge advent of the telemedicine platforms, right? You look at telemedicine in terms of, what's this background noise?
Oh, sorry about that. Sarah, can you go ahead and mute? I think we have some echo there.
Perfect.
Okay, no worries. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in India, there's been a huge proliferation in the telemedicine and telehealth platforms, right? Prior to this, the government was very reluctant in terms of approving these regulations for telemedicine and ensuring that, you have online prescriptions, online medical consultations. That it was being restricted by the government artificially. However, with COVID coming, the government kind of had no choice, and they had to approve that, which then led to a huge ballooning in the space, and the existing players, the existing healthcare players, the larger ones, they all jumped into the bandwagon, and we've seen a huge shift already to the telemedicine space, right? So that is just what happened during the COVID. In coming 2021, I see a lot of opportunities in trying to make the healthcare delivery systems much more easier. In terms of, if you look at it right now, the delivery systems is too complicated and too difficult, and it is highly localized, right? Even if you do telemedicine or telehealth, what happens is you can only have a consultation with a doctor, but you also need to provide those services, right? And right now, healthcare is very location specific. If you can come up with some sort of innovation where you can remove the location part of it and still provide those services directly to the customer, the end customer, it becomes extremely crucial, particularly in a country like India, where more than half the population is still staying in villages, where the access to health basic primary care facilities, where those kind of things get taken care of. Additionally, I see a lot of importance of data, right? I think the COVID pandemic unfortunately killed millions of lives, which could have been saved had we had proper access to medical and healthcare records, right? And this problem is not just particular to India or US. This is across the world. The medical data recording which is happening, and each and every hospital wants to kind of feed their own record of their own patients to themselves, and they don't want to share. That kind of creates a huge problem. There needs to be kind of like a public repository, like a public record of all that data, and the data should be interchangeable, so that the entire patient's history is easily available, so that in the event of such a crisis in the future, we can kind of customize it, identify the most vulnerable population, and take better care of them. Right now, we were completely caught unprepared. If we had a better knowledge and understanding of the people's medical conditions, we could have definitely been in a much better position and saved a lot of lives if we had that kind of data with us.
So Harsh, so let's put a pin in that right there. So that's what was. Now it's similar to Sarah, what is to be. So lessons learned, how are things going to change, right? What are you seeing changing here in the coming year and a half? Sarah, can you go on mute for a second, please? Thank you. So Harsh, where do you see things going now? Lessons learned, unfortunately. Where do you see things going in the next year?
Yeah, so these problems, right? So there are already startups which are working on that right now. So they are trying to simplify the data process, data collection process. They are making it interoperable, right? There are a couple startups. What they are doing is they are digitizing the data much more easily. Initially, they used to do a lot of complicated procedures, trying to get the doctors to enter, and since that was not working, they are working on a lot of ingenious methods using handwriting recognition, using AI-based records and other kind of formats to kind of digitize the person's complete healthcare. Then they're getting into patients 24/7 monitoring, right? So you have something like a Fitbit, but Fitbit is still very basic. We try to capture more information through the help of wearable devices and other kind of devices which does not include too many wires. Right now, the problem with a lot of other medical devices, it has way too many wires and it tends to get a bit irritating, right? So coming up with unique devices of that kind, that will become crucial. Then additionally, you look at it, doctors right now are pretty overworked right now, if you look at it overall, right? So if you can kind of simplify doctors, when a doctor kind of communicates with the patient, how can you ensure that the each and everything is communicated over there itself to minimize the duplication of efforts from the doctor side? These are some kind of things which we can see immediate progress on within the coming next 1 or 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Harsh. And Sarah, coming back to you, I mean, in terms of personalized medicine and connected devices, I've got a lot of experience and interest in this area as well as many others who tune into VCTV. Do you see this starting to enter into the general practitioners or into hospitals on a mainstream scale in terms of adoption, or do you see this still many years off to where we may be wearing connected devices that give real-time data back to our doctors and our medical records in some way, shape, or form?
So I think that it will be driven on a needs basis and where things are going to, these approaches are going to be most useful, because therefore I think that you ought to look disease area by disease area, and there will of course also be an overlay of how advanced a country is, how accepting a population is, to be honest, of that kind of level of digital surveillance, and how collection of that data is handled and done in a consented and appropriate fashion. I strongly believe that in the CNS area, so we're talking about neurological conditions ranging from dementias through to depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth, connected devices will have a strong role to play in the future, because those are areas that are particularly amenable to the use of connected devices, whether they're to track the progress and diagnose through digital biomarkers, to providing support to conventional pharmacotherapy, or even indeed being therapies on their own, because of course we are seeing digital therapeutics in that area. So that's about the nature of many CNS conditions, I think. In other areas, if you think about cancers, where of course it's imperative that patients do come into hospital most of the time, they may well be on IV treatment, and I do not see that as being home administered on any kind of scale in the near future. You are probably going to continue to see a more conventional facilities-based situation for diagnosis and care. And bear in mind, when we think of some of the most advanced molecular therapeutics, gene therapies and cell therapies, not only can these only be administered in facilities, they can only be administered in certain facilities that actually have staff trained and the systems organized to deliver what is an incredibly sophisticated therapeutic. So you've got to look at it on a disease area by disease area basis. But the advantage of digital support where it really, really works is its ability to scale at a relatively insignificant cost. And if we bear in mind that the majority of people suffer from conditions which are highly prevalent, whether they're cardiovascular conditions or neurological conditions, and so on and so forth. And these are areas which absolutely had molecular innovation in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. But after that, they became generic and the molecular innovation didn't occur there. There's a ripe opportunity for digital innovation in those areas to address the needs which are still not addressed by the fact that you have molecular therapeutics, and those molecular therapeutics are ubiquitous and cheap.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And Harsh, anything to add to Sarah's point on that as well?
Yeah, so the point that she mentioned was pretty valid, right? It's going to be therapeutics by therapeutics, because each and every modality, each and every illness, they each have their own peculiarities, right? So we are currently actually raising funds for a cancer therapeutics company. They've completely changed the way how cancer research and that development goes, right? They are really incorporating AI well, and they are helping minimize the time that is taken for clinical research, and there are lots of other benefits which are there. So it's going to be dependent on each and every individual therapeutic treatment which is there. I would try to take it one step further, that in terms of therapeutics, it's definitely a huge advantage. Additionally, we should also look at most of the therapeutics are focusing on the cure, right? However, if you look at in terms of the standard of living, what is happening is we are having these therapeutics to increase the number of years of a person's age. From 70, 80 on average, people are going beyond like 80 and 90. How do we also improve the quality of the life when people reach that high age, right? So for example, if you're reaching 80 and 90 but you're stuck in a wheelchair, it doesn't really help, it doesn't really benefit anyone, right? How can we improve that quality of life? How can we ensure that the monitoring is done on a regular basis to ensure that not only so for example, diabetes, right? People until the age of 40, they don't even kind of get a basic glucose check done to see if they have diabetes. We switch from that and do like an ongoing 24/7 kind of a testing mechanism, where you have some sort of device connected to you, and it does it on a regular basis all the while, right? Something of that sort, instead of just waiting, maybe doing it once in a year, once every 2 years. How you can do it on an ongoing basis to monitor where your situation is currently. That is something we should be looking at down the line.
Yeah, and that Harsh kind of leads me to a question here: is what other technologies are we looking at that need to enter into the industry to really help it progress in ways that we're describing, that there are some current hurdles, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it is blockchain. We've talked about quantum computing entering in this space in many different ways, but from your view, what are you seeing as some of the rising technologies that need to enter into the healthcare space sooner than later to help it progress in the way that you've outlined?
Absolutely. So AI is beyond a doubt the most important thing over here, right? AI not only helps you in pattern recognition, but also helps you in customization, right? So you look at AI in terms of medical records transcription. Medical records transcription itself is like $1 billion industry, and it goes completely under the radar. Most people aren't really even aware of that, right? So you can use AI into medical transcription space. It's already being used very well in the radiology space, right? Where you can actually have those scans being completely read by an AI engine, and it turns out it's 90% as effective as a doctor. So AI in radiology, also in pathology, right? So there are specific pathology labs in India who started using AI to get pattern recognition, and based on that, they can actually future diagnose where the person's future state is going to be, right? Additionally, there's a molecular genetics company. What they do is they do a DNA testing of the individuals to kind of identify what kind of illnesses that the person could be genetically prone to, what kind of products they have allergies to, those kind of products, right? So things like these will start to get more acceptance down the line. So AI is definitely going to be the major change maker. Additionally, I would like to add that blockchain has its own role to play. If you look at it in the overarching scheme of things, right, blockchain is going to be the best one to kind of ensure a centralized data management, because it not only provides individual level encryption, and yet the data is there collectively on the server, right? If you do conventional technology to maintain health records, it's prone to a lot of vulnerabilities and weaknesses, right? On the other hand, if you use blockchain for the same purpose, it could kind of mitigate a lot of the other risks and challenges which could happen with centralized keeping data of each and every patient through multiple channels. So that is where I see a lot of potential happening through blockchain as well as AI. Additional point which I forgot is the most crucial point right now is the supply chain, right? COVID kind of exposed the entire weakness of the healthcare supply chain. How we are ridiculously dependent on China right now, right? If you can use AI to kind of create an alternative form of supply chain in the form of predicting. So, for example, if you're anticipating there's going to be a specific spurt in the demand of a specific product, right? It kind of helps you to plan the inventory in a better way, in a better process, to ensure that the logistics are kind of taken care of. It also takes into account the international logistics, the international tax rates, etc. So these are some of the things where I see a lot of applications of AI and blockchain.
Thank you, Harsha. Sarah, anything to add on to that? And then I have a follow-up question for you as well.
Okay. So I think that we also need to think about the developments that will happen in terms of understanding the base cause of human disease. Although we are now in a situation where whole genome sequencing is possible for a relatively trivial sum. I think that it's now sub $1,000. The fact of the matter is that the number of human beings in the world who have had their genetic data sequenced to some level is still in the order of tens of millions. I think that it is under 50 million people in aggregate. And of course, we're living on a planet with 7 billion people. So it's pretty clear that we have insight into the genetic information of a minority of the world's population. And the ones that we mostly know about tend to live in either Europe or the US and be Caucasian. That's something that for human health as a whole will need to change over the course of the next decade. And we see increasingly that genomics initiatives to collect genomic data are being established by governments and private organizations, and also public research organizations around the world. Once we start to have more data, I think that the use of that data to understand the basic drivers of disease as we link genotype to phenotype, and to use that insight to develop better therapeutics is going to accelerate. One of the things that 2020 showed the world was that if there was a combination of pharmaceutical industry, innovation and ingenuity, and political and healthcare system will, you could bring a vaccine through all its development stage, get it approved, and get it into the arms of millions of people in the course of a year, which wisdom would previously have said would take at least 10 years. That is because all of the actors in bringing that product to market were focused on the need for speed. It wasn't because any steps in proving that those vaccines were safe and effective were missed out. They weren't. They went through the whole system. Now that the industry has shown that it can do that, and regulators have shown that they can be flexible and fast when they need, it's going to be quite difficult to go back. I think. I'm not saying that for all other therapeutics, suddenly the development time compresses from a decade to a year. But I think that people will very much take learnings from what has happened in the last year and try to apply them to bringing therapeutics to market faster, well.
That's a great point. In the future of medicine as we may know it, to your point, that tipping point. And Sarah, I do have a follow-up. You mentioned data. And one thing that we commonly speak about, but sometimes also goes by the wayside, is data and data privacy, and specifically around the healthcare industry. Have you seen any innovations, or do you foresee any innovations coming down the line this year in 2021 around data and privacy for the healthcare industry as we start to open up more sharing of data in some places than others?
I think that any organization that works with patients' healthcare data has to have front of mind at all times the ethical and legal and regulatory implications of what they are doing. Just a clear point and can't be emphasized enough. And I think that all technology companies that are playing in this space have to understand that they are dealing with a different situation when they are working with people's healthcare data, and be compliant with the regulations that exist. Because if you aren't, you destroy trust. And if you destroy trust, you do not make progress in this area. And progress is very, very possible. I think that clearly world populations, politicians have seen the need to understand healthcare provision and healthcare innovation, to plan and build strategy around healthcare provision. That's been brought home to them very clearly in this year. So we have the opportunity for a new dialogue. But when you are dealing with individuals' private healthcare information, you have to make sure that you abide by the rules. That doesn't stop you being innovative, but it does mean that you need to combine progress in innovation with building and retaining the trust of the people whose information you are using.
Mm-hmm. And thank you, Sarah. Harsh, big, bold prediction as we come to close here. Where do you see the healthcare innovations going, not just in 2021, but even looking ahead into 2022? What are the big closing thoughts that you have on that prediction? And then where can everyone find you online to continue the conversation around healthcare?
Got it. So first and foremost, the most major thing which I see happening is a shortening in time of the drugs to the market and the vaccines to the market, right? During the current COVID vaccine, unfortunately, there were a few gray areas. A lot of industry reports which I have read, they've kind of mentioned that the phase 3 and phase 4 clinical trials were extremely rushed and kind of did not go through the entire steps that they had to go through, right? So these are the kind of limitations which kind of should not have gone through. And so we need to not only streamline the processes better, but have certain systems in place so that those kind of learnings we don't have to skip through, but we can do it in a much more efficient fashion so that we can get the same quality of drugs as we used to get before in a lesser amount of time. So instead of having like 4 years or 5 years to have a molecule into the market, we can get it done within 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years. So that is the biggest area where I see a lot of progress that could happen. Additionally, the point which I already mentioned earlier, like supply chain. Supply chain is one of the most crucial elements over here in terms of ensuring across the world that we should be able to dynamically predict where the requirement is and being able to move the resources very quickly. That is another thing. In terms of the therapeutic side, I see a lot of progress happening in terms of diagnostic elements, right? The current test, the RT-PCR test right now is kind of like, it's not truly accurate test for COVID. It works for all kind of viruses, right? It works for any coronavirus. We need a better accurate diagnostic system, but instead of it being like an 80 or 90% accurate, which the current RT-PCR test is, something slightly more accurate and something more faster. Right now, the other faster methods which were there, the rapid tests were there, the accuracy rate wasn't that impressive. So we need to come up with constantly innovative kind of models where we can get these tests done in a much more faster time frame with a higher accuracy rate. So these are some of the major areas where I see a lot of progress happening. So, and if glad to be a part of VCTV, and if anyone wants to reach out to me, they can reach out to me at Harsh Shethia on LinkedIn. Be happy to connect with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Harsh. Sarah, to you, closing thoughts as well, and where can you be found online to continue the conversation?
So people can reach out to me as Sarah Rickwood on LinkedIn. In terms of closing thoughts, I think that we have to think of digital innovations hand in hand with the existing innovation of the pharmaceutical industry. I think that the progress will be made when molecular innovation joins with digital innovation in this sense. We treat things also on a condition by condition basis, because there may well be conditions where the molecules are essentially generic. The molecules are old but effective, and that's fine, but it doesn't mean that there aren't unmet needs. They may be needs, for example, about compliance, where actually a digital solution is the right solution to keep people on track with their medications and make sure that they understand the outcomes. That would still be the right innovation to progress and improve outcomes in that area. And other areas, for example, very rare genetic diseases, then the innovation is undoubtedly first and foremost molecular, because the condition is caused by a genetic defect, and fixing that genetic defect, whether it's by CRISPR or by other forms of gene therapy, will first and foremost be the treatment. And there may well be digital support on top of that, but it is going to play a lesser role to the more important molecular role. So understanding that how that plays out, I think, is going to be enormously interesting. It also means that first and foremost, we need to understand the conditions and the patient needs before we take from our toolbox the kind of innovation that's going to provide a solution in that particular area.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah and Harsh. Really appreciate your thoughts and insights around this industry and where things are going as well. And excited to continue this conversation here on VCTV with you both. To your audience, again, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard, make sure you click subscribe, share the episode, and also check out the archive on LATOKEN.com to hear more from our speakers today and all of the speakers in the VCTV family. And also make sure to reach out to Sarah and to Harsh to continue the conversation, and remember to add context when you do, where you heard them, where you met them, and also what you would like to talk about as well. And a big thank you to the LATOKEN team and to Maria for making VCTV possible every single day. I'm your host, Kyle Ellicott. You can find me everywhere online at Kyle Ellicott as well. And we'll be back here tomorrow with more VCTV for you, along with the latest and greatest trends and what's happening in blockchain and crypto. With that, everyone have a wonderful day. We'll see you back tomorrow.